Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all the extremely important work you're doing for Social Security. I flew in from Washington, D.C. last night, and as you have already heard, I am afraid to tell you that Washington politicians have their knives out for Social Security. The forces arrayed against this program are more widespread and powerful than ever before. Let me explain, and let me tell you what you can do to fight back this serious, so far stealth attack. Throughout Social Security's 75-year history, there have always been a small group of Americans who opposed the program on ideological grounds, who believed it to be socialism, who believed government should not be used to help middle-class Americans improve their own economic security. Their opposition was always just a small minority view. It was repeatedly rejected by most Americans who recognized Social Security for the vital economic security and stability it provides. The American people recognize that as long as people are dependent on wages, they need insurance against the loss of those wages in the event of death, disability, or old age, which is what Social Security is. Those opposed to Social Security sought to undermine it in the 1930s, but they failed. In the 1940s, and again they failed. In the 1950s, they couldn't win over President Eisenhower, and again they failed. Indeed, in November 8, 1954, President Eisenhower wrote a letter to his brother Edgar, in which he said, quote, "There is a tiny splinter group who believes that you can abolish Social Security. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid." In the 1960s, Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan opposed Social Security straightforwardly on ideological grounds and got battered for it. By the 1970s, politicians learned not to oppose Social Security on ideological grounds. Instead, the program's opponents sought to chip away at its support more subtly. They wrongly, erroneously claimed that younger Americans would not get their money's worth from Social Security, for example. Starting in the 1990s, they argued that Social Security, together with Medicare and Medicaid, were part of a so-called entitlements crisis. Opponents started saying that Social Security is a great program, but the nation can't afford it. George W. Bush, in his 2005 State of the Union address, said just that, quote, "Social Security was a great moral success of the 20th century, but it is headed towards bankruptcy." More recently, they tied Social Security to the deficit and argued that it had to be cut for that reason. Unfortunately, our policy and media elite, including a number of Democrats, have been convinced by these false claims. Indeed, these lies have become the conventional wisdom. You've all heard them. That Social Security is unaffordable. That if it's not fundamentally changed or at least cut back, it will bankrupt your children and grandchildren. It is everywhere. You see it in the Washington Post, the New York Times, USA Today, the network news, and on cable news. It's permeated the mainstream media. Young people lack confidence that Social Security will be there for them. Most distressing of all, under pressure from the deficit hawks, President Obama established a deficit commission with an explicit mandate to rein in entitlements. As was just mentioned, this commission is scheduled to report on December 1. Most of its members have expressed opposition throughout their careers to Social Security. As you just heard, one of its co-chairs is the former Senator Alan Simpson. He claimed just recently that Americans are milking the system. He described Social Security as, quote, "a milk cow with 310 million tits." He fails to understand that the American people pay for Social Security. They earn their benefits. As offensive and crude as Simpson's comments, he's stating what many on the commission believe. What's truly distressing, though, is that this is not your typical commission. If 14 of the 18 members agree, they have already been promised an up or down vote in the lame duck session. We will be told that everyone has to sacrifice in order to control the deficit. What we will not be told is that Social Security has not contributed to the deficit and will not. The truth is that Social Security is the most fiscally responsible and conservatively managed public program in the United States. By law, it can only pay benefits if it has the income to cover the costs. It has no borrowing authority, and so has never and will never go into debt. Just the opposite. In anticipation of the retirement of the baby boom, it has built up a reserve of $2.6 trillion, which is supposed to grow to $4.2 trillion. This is surplus over the next decade and a half. Indeed, last year alone, it ran a surplus of over $120 billion, despite the recession, which caused its income to go down and its costs to rise, as older workers who lost jobs claimed retirement benefits. It is extremely efficient to manage, returning in benefits more than 99 cents of every dollar spent, much more efficient than any private pension system will find. As part of its conservative management, professional actuaries have since 1941 prepared a report every year for Social Security's Board of Trustees to send to Congress. The 2010 report was released just this August 5th. As is customary, it projected the income and outgo of Social Security for the next 3/4 of a century. This is a longer valuation period than private pensions use, and longer than that used by most other countries of the world for their Social Security programs. It's part of the conservative management. The current trustees report projects that Social Security can, with no congressional action whatsoever, pay all benefits in full and on time for the next quarter century, until 2037, and will have sufficient income after that to pay 3/4 of benefits, even if Congress were to do nothing. Given such a long valuation period, it's not surprising that the actuaries would project deficits or even unintended surpluses from time to time way off in the future. Indeed, such close monitoring of Social Security's financial circumstances should reassure Americans that it will always pay benefits on time, just as it always has. Instead, that's been turned on its head. The manageable and used to scare Americans. The manageable deficit, just 0.6% of gross domestic product, about the same cost as making permanent the Bush tax cuts for the top 2% of wealthiest Americans, can easily be addressed on the revenue side in a timely and fair manner. It can and should be addressed through the normal legislative process, as it always has. For that to happen, though, we need to have it addressed by people who believe in the program, who value it, who recognize how important a role it plays. Social Security's benefits are extremely modest, less than $13,000 a year on average, but they are crucially important to virtually all who receive them. Today, almost 2/3 of the elderly receive half or more of their income from Social Security. More than 1/3 receive 90% or more of their income from Social Security. The benefits are particularly important to women and minorities. As a result of its dependent benefits, it's the nation's largest children's program, with over 6.5 million children either receiving benefits directly or living in homes where they live. It is the largest source of income of grandparents raising grandchildren. It's the nation's largest disability program. Monthly Social Security benefits are received by 6.5 million disabled workers. Without that monthly check, 55% of disabled workers and their families would live in poverty. The benefits lift almost 20 million people out of poverty, including over a million children. Seniors, workers who have become disabled and their families, and families who've lost a breadwinner are no longer left totally destitute dependent on relatives, private charity, or a government handout, as they once were. Social Security has transformed our nation. It's been about much more than money. It's about dignity, independence, and freedom. The real question is how to ensure that Social Security can continue to serve families and the nation in the future. Not only can we afford its benefits, we can afford and should be talking about increasing those benefits. Especially in light of what's happened to the equity of people's homes and 401k plans and other savings. The very best thing Congress can do for Social Security is put people back to work in good paying jobs. Nothing will strengthen Social Security more than jobs for the country's workers now and in the future. Rather than talking about raising Social Security's retirement age or cutting its benefits in other ways or even privatizing the program, we should be talking about eliminating its manageable deficit by requiring those who can pay more to do so and by expanding its benefits, expanding its protection. But we can't get to that question of increasing Social Security's benefits as long as our policy and media elite today have bought into this conventional wisdom. Instead, we're in the midst of fighting politicians who propose cutting the program. That is the immediate challenge confronting us. We must all work to help them see the truth. It's particularly challenging in an election year. Although many of the Democrats are misguided, most Republicans are straight out hostile to Social Security. They won't say so, of course. Instead, they'll talk about not changing anything for those aged 55 and older. They'll talk about allowing younger workers simply a choice. They're careful about how they talk about Social Security because they know the American people overwhelmingly support it. We have a huge education campaign and not much time. We must insist that Democrats stand firm against all benefit cuts, including increases in retirement age. We should ask every candidate for federal office where he or she is on the issue of Social Security, and not let that person off the hook by saying no cuts for those over a certain age. The right answer has to be no cuts for anyone, but instead expansion. We have some promising signs and vehicles. Congressmen Grijalva, Conyers, and Mathey have authored a letter to President Obama insisting on no increase in the retirement age, no benefit cuts, and no privatization. Over 130 members have signed so far. Every incumbent should be asked to sign, and every candidate should be asked to pledge the same. There's a similar proposal in the Senate, and again, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced it, 11 others have co-sponsored it. Again, every incumbent should be asked to co-sponsor it, and every candidate should be asked to pledge the same. Prior to the election, we must convince our elected officials to recognize that Social Security in particular, and the government more generally, belongs to us. It can and must serve to make our lives better. But our work can't stop on November 2nd. We must stop the Deficit Commission's recommendations, which are due on December 1, from becoming law. Then we must fight to convince our representatives to do what the American people want. Don't cut, but expand Social Security. There's much polarization in the country today, but Social Security is an issue where the American people are united. Poll after poll has shown that Democrats, Republicans, Independents, the young, the old, Tea Partiers, and union households alike all support Social Security, all value it, do not want it cut, and indeed think its benefits are too low. We must all make our voices heard and stop the Washington elites from thinking they know better. The danger is real, but the people and justice are on the side of those who believe in this vital institution, which has stood the test of time and transformed our nation in powerful and important ways. Thank you.